Hi everyone, Talia from Zart Art. Today we're going to be making a wax monoprint using sensory paper. So sensory paper is like a very fine sandpaper. So when you touch it, it is quite rough, but it's not as hard as a sandpaper might be, so it's fine to run your fingers over it. So usually it comes in A3, but I've just cut this down to a smaller size to work on. We've got some oil pastels here, as well as some rubbing blocks. So anything that's like an oil pastel or a wax crayon will work for this method. So to start off with, I'm just going to draw a design onto the sensory paper. We'll do some cactus drawings because cacti are quite popular at the moment. So we'll do some cacti shapes on the sensory paper, and then we'll move on to the next stage of printing. So when you're working on the sensory paper, it's important to make sure you get a nice thick layer of the oil pastel on. It's also a really nice surface to use oil pastel on, even just to leave it by itself, as there is a nice thick layer of pastel and it's very easy to blend over the top of as well. But just make sure that for this monoprint you get a nice thick layer, and even using different tones over the top of each other will look quite nice, just to get those variations in colour and texture as well. So when working on the sensory paper, it's good to use a few different colours of oil pastel when you're working. This is just so you can get really nice varied tones on the paper, and you need a nice thick layer of the oil pastel so it will transfer over. The sensory paper is nice to work on with oil pastel itself because you can really blend the colours and work over the top. Now that we've got our picture drawn on the sensory paper, the next step is to iron it onto a surface. So we're just going to be using some coloured cotton, but you can use any natural material like calico, or even if you've got pencil cases, bags that you want to iron the design onto, they'll work quite well as well. Clean up my mess. Now we've got our ironing board, we've got our piece of cotton. If whatever fabric you're working on is wrinkled, just give it an iron before you start, just so there's no wrinkles in your page once you're working on it. So we've got our image, flip it down wherever you want to place the image onto your fabric, and the iron is set on high, so it's quite hot. So this might be something that you want to do for the kids instead of the kids using an iron in the room, because this iron is quite hot. You just want to make sure you have an even layer of heat across the image, just so all of the oil pastel or wax crayon you've drawn onto that will melt off onto the cotton itself. So I usually like to iron it for about 30 seconds, just to make sure you get the heat all the way across the image. Take the sensory paper off, and now we've got our wax print that has gone over to the cotton fabric. So as you can see, there are some little gaps in the cotton where the design hasn't transferred all the way through, but that gives it quite a nice look. So you can see most of the details from the fabric over the top. If you did want to cover in those little pieces, then you could redraw over your print and then line it up and print it again to get a more bold image. But I think the texture of that looks quite nice, especially with our organic design. So we've got our finished piece, and don't forget you can do things like bags and pencil cases as well, and keep repeating the design over and over again if it is quite a small design, or even for group pieces, this might work quite well as well. Now this is quite an easy and simple way of doing a printmaking activity. Also, if you wanted to do textiles work with younger kids, this is a really nice way of an introduction to working on fabrics and different kinds of materials. So you can tick off a printmaking lesson as well as a textiles lesson in this, and give the kids who might not have done much printing before a chance to see what monoprinting is like. Is that all right? Yeah.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.